Hi Glenn.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to sit together here with you. First of all, would you mind to introduce yourself to the audience?
So I'm Glenn Vanderlinden. I come from Brussels, Belgium, and I'm the co-founder of a company called Human37, and what we do is customer data strategy.
Okay, so how was your day so far?
Pretty good. Didn't sleep much because I was kind of excited, but lots of interesting talks and very well organized. I must say I'm very impressed with how all things are actually being set up.
Oh,
so very cool.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You already had your speech on stage. It was a very interesting talk. The room was full of interested people and you had some interesting follow-up questions afterwards. Could you, for our audience here, please maybe summarize your talk in a few sentences?
So long story short, the talk was mostly about everybody's moving data to the cloud in data warehouses. However, not all data warehouses are created equal. We make kind of the distinction between a marketing data warehouse and a customer data warehouse. We kind of zoomed in on what is a customer data warehouse, meaning that a customer data warehouse per definition is focused on data activation, and then we went through a couple of use cases.
Okay. Yeah, you brought up two terms. One is the marketing data warehouse and the other one is the customer data warehouse. Could you maybe differentiate both terms a bit?
Yeah, and it's kind of an arbitrary term, right? It's kind of like two radical extremes to make a point. The reason why we make that point is that when we sometimes ask customers, like, do you have a data warehouse? They will say yes. And if you open up the data warehouse, what you see is that it's basically data exports from Google Ads or Meta or something like that. But for a lot of the use cases, it's actually not super useful except for reporting, right? So usually what we say is a marketing data warehouse consists of data from advertising platforms with the main purpose to report, actually. Okay. Where the customer data warehouse is actually composed of data points which are generated by customers and which contain identifiers. So we're able to bring that data together, build a customer profile, and actually use that data in different platforms. For instance, for custom audiences, but also in email platforms, push notifications, or even share that data to platforms such as customer support so they can do their job better.
I see. So with Human37, which you are a co-founder of, you are in the business of helping your clients with customer data warehousing, with doing and activating their marketing data. So what are your typical clients?
The answer is, unfortunately, it depends, right?
Yeah.
We kind of have very big enterprise clients. Some of our clients, for instance, include IKEA. On the other hand, we also have quite some scale-ups, a lot of SaaS companies as well, which have customer data at the heart because they're trying to bring these very personalized experiences from the start. And so they already have part of the infrastructure, and we intervene to help them either build that out or to bring those use cases they have in their head to life. So it kind of depends.
Okay, what would be a typical use case?
The easiest use case of all is I would like to start measuring conversions in my ad platforms, usually marketing use cases because they're fairly easy to implement because they don't impact the infrastructure at the company necessarily. More advanced use cases are I would like to personalize my website based on previous interaction and purchase behavior that a user did in the past, or I would like to send specific messages depending on the use cases and customer already fulfilled, purchases they did, etc., etc. So our main focus is actually aligning customer experiences based on the data that the customer generated and make sure that the customer gets a consistent experience across channels. To elaborate, or we call it elevating customer experiences, because we believe that, well, if you build amazing experiences, then de facto your business will grow. And we use customer data in order to get there.
I see. So now I imagine that you have a customer data warehouse, you connect multiple data sources, you have your analytics tools, you maybe have your CRM data, you have maybe logistics data, whatever you want to analyze and activate. Now you bring it all in one place, and the challenge is for everything you want to do, you need to have a common ground. You need to have a common denominator for this data. Can you explore a bit on the challenge of stitching the data together from multiple sources?
Yeah, so basically the more sources we start ingesting, the more types of identifiers we get, right? If there's anonymous behavioral data, we first get an anonymous ID. If that user would then log in, we get a user ID. Later, we might see email address or device ID. And so the whole task of identity resolution or building an identification engine is to figure out, like, okay, which identifier belongs with which user, right? Obviously, everything is protected by consent, so you can track whatever you want. It's only for data points that we're allowed to capture. But doing so allows us to get that customer 360-degree overview and actually build consistent experiences for specific users. Now, the main challenge is that building an identity resolution engine is pretty hard. You can join data using different tables, and what we're now doing is we're doing more graph-based solutions, where we say, like, okay, if we see identifier A together with B, and then later we see B together with C, we actually build an identity cluster around it, meaning that a user is composed of maybe 9, 10, 12 identities, depending on which devices they used, which sources we used to ingest the data. But based on any of those identities, we can actually personalize the interaction for that user.
So you find the commonalities between those data sets, and then you stitch together one profile.
Exactly.
Okay, how's it about privacy and consent? How's this reflected in this setup?
It's a very interesting question. Why? Because the last, I think, 6 months, I've spent most of my meetings actually with DPOs to help figure that out. Because typically what you see is that marketing has these use cases, and then the DPO needs to figure out, are we actually allowed to do it, right? Then usually they ask us, but as a disclaimer, I'm not a legal person. I think very few people in our field are actually legal people. And it's I think our task to figure out what we should do, right? It's not because you can do something that you should do something. And in collaboration with the DPO, we're there to figure out, like, okay, technically it's possible, but should we do it? Are we allowed to do it? And then we basically start mapping the entire journey of a customer. Like, imagine a customer lands on a website, they accept cookies. Are we later on able to share their first-party data with platform, yes or no? And we basically start crossing yes and no's everywhere. And based on that, we get some base rules or rules of engagement when it comes to consent within the context of the company and within the way that they apply GDPR that helps us actually navigate what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So I think the collaboration between DPOs we've seen in the last 6 months is intensifying. And even though a lot of people say, like, yeah, but the DPO and legal is not usually the friend of a lot of stakeholders in the company, we actually see that it works really well if you start opening the black box of what tracking is actually about and explaining what is possible and what is not and what the restrictions are that we can put in place.
Okay. Now, when you think about setting up such a large marketing or customer data warehouse, how is it possible to make use of it when you only have a certain amount of consent-based users, or other way around? Can you use it when you not have a significant amount of consent-based users?
Okay, it's a fair question. I think it depends on the use cases. Like, if you would ship data to advertising platforms, usually there's a threshold of volume you need, right? While if you use it in own channels, at least I believe is every awesome interaction that you can build for a customer is a win, even though it's only 30% or 40% of customers that you can personalize on the website through email, or even better through customer support or stuff like that. So I think it's important to figure out what is the use case and start usually with the owned channels, because that's what you control and where you have a direct interaction with the customer, and see if you can use that info to remove points in the customer journey where there's friction. I'm typically using the use case of I call my telco provider 15 times to figure out why the hell it's taking so long that my ticket is not being resolved, and the 16th time I need to re-explain my whole problem again. To me, it makes no sense. Because they have all of the data, they know who I am, they know which tickets I have logged, so instead of me providing all of that info again, they actually should be able to have that overview and make my journey less or more frictionless. So I think those are the low-hanging fruit use cases, and all of the rest is, like, depending on the volume, those will open up.
Okay, yeah, you were telling me about one use case about where you had this soccer club and about unsold tickets. Could you repeat that again, because that was really interesting and it was very tangible.
So basically, it's a sports club. They organize obviously games. People buy tickets. Sometimes the tickets are sold out. But we have oftentimes an idea of which fans would be interested in attending the game. When tickets aren't sold, they basically go on a peer-to-peer platform where they are being resold. And as soon as tickets open up, we're actually looking into which fans would be most interested to getting a hold of this ticket. And then we send them a personalized message over email or push notification. So basically we're stitching a bunch of data in the data warehouse or in the composed TDP, whatever you want to call it, right? To figure out which user is the most likely or most interested, and do we have volume to offer to that user. And so based on that, we're actually able to, one, make fans happy, but also from a business point of view, it makes sense to have a full venue rather than empty seats, right?
Okay, interesting. Let's zoom out a bit and maybe look at the overall industry development. How do you see the future of that large topic? So is it rather, I make it a bit more concrete, is it rather that company teams would buy solutions, maybe from external service providers or from SaaS companies, or would they rather build stuff in-house? What's your take on that?
I think honestly it depends. There's companies who will forever build because they want control over everything and they don't like black boxes or whatever. So they will build forever. It's also kind of where the composable CDP came from, right? In the beginning it was only packaged CDP, now it's composable CDP because we're opening up all of these components because people want to have control, they want to build stuff themselves. And it's one school of thought or philosophy, which is valid. And then you have the point where people start buying things, right? The components were in the past, in a composable CDP, were challenging. You see that they are being now productized. And last week I had a very interesting conversation with somebody from Snowflake who said like, the whole world of SaaS is becoming composable. And you're actually able to buy the very specific bricks you need, where in the past you would buy an entire solution, which de facto would be composed of different things. But now it's easier to start buying different pieces on their own and you fill in the gaps. So my belief is going to be a blend of both, but it's going to be easier to build because the components that you don't want to build, you're not going to build, but you're going to buy that specific piece to solve the problem.
So you basically built a collection of different niche SaaS services where you just built your marketing data house on top.
And if you look at packaged solutions, it's also kind of what they're doing, right? They're adding more features and a lot of the vendors also allow you to buy specific pieces from them more and more.
But isn't that also a bit risky because you have multiple SaaS companies or multiple vendors all dealing with your privacy or sensitive data?
Yeah, it's a fair point. There's a case to be made for that. We call it to some extent buyer friction, or we classify it in buyer friction, meaning that for one, there's procurement. If you buy one tool, it's easier. The procurement cycle only happens once. But it also means that the DPIA only happens once, the validation of is this tool trustworthy or can I trust this tool with my data? When you build composable elements, you're going to go through the procurement cycle every time, and you're going to have multiple DPIAs to fill, which is going to be kind of a pain in the ass, right? But what we see more and more is that in this kind of best of breed solution, that some vendors are still like, even though they're separate companies, they're having a joint offer more and more to go to market like, okay, you guys do behavioral data collection and we do identity resolution. We should go to market together. When we package it as one solution, it's one offering, even though we're two separate companies and we could bundle with whoever we want. So there's a case to be made indeed, but I don't think we have a choice in general because privacy is not here to stay, it's here to grow, and we should. It's a very important aspect, and I think that a lot of vendors will also adapt to that, to be privacy centered or by design or whatever you want to call it, to make sure that they pass all of those checkboxes.
Great. Now, when you look at the decision maker perspective from a marketing team or from an analytics director, so what are the main mistakes that people make when they think about building such a solution?
In general, that it's easy. It's easy. It's not super hard all the time, but it's usually not as easy as you would expect. Also, a lot of these solutions are event driven. And so depending on the maturity of a company and their comfort with the fact that they need to build a tracking plan with events that come in, etc., that could kind of be like a whole revolution for them. And then secondly, and it's a bottleneck we'll always have in tracking, is the whole concept of like the development cycle to get data somewhere, right? You still need a data layer or an SDK to be populated for behavioral data. Transactional data can actually come from backends straight into the data warehouse, or we can build data pipelines the other way around. But whenever you need technical resources, you're kind of delivered at the mercy of the speed that that company can operate. And usually the people who buy the solution or have the idea about the use case and the architecture that they need aren't necessarily the people implementing it. And so aligning those two teams, or maybe 3 or 4 teams, whatever, the success on your go-to-market speed actually, for me, depends on that.
I see. Well, Glenn, thank you. I believe we now at the end of the time here. So my last question is, how did you like the event, and would you come next year?
I liked the event very much. I actually had very interesting talks as well with people, like over coffee, which I think is always the added value of actually joining the event. And next year I'd be happy to come back, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for the interview.
Thank you very much for having me.